This is the Enjoyer Podcast. I'm your host, James Dixon. When I read around the Michigan media market, it's easy to lose hope. I see reporters acting as repeaters. I see reporters writing headlines in the voice of our governor, Gretchen Whitmer. Well, for years it was Whitmer, anyway, until it became clear she would never hold higher office beyond Lansing. These days, it's Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan or Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson. It's always a Democrat, and the media market always covers for them rather than covering them. When I read around the Michigan media market, most times I'm not reading the work of good journalists. I'm reading the work of bad comms people, some of the worst we have in Michigan. I think about the Detroit News treating it as an accomplishment of election integrity that a Chinaman voted in November in Michigan, in Ann Arbor, and his vote was counted because the guy was caught. Problem is, he wasn't caught. In fact, he turned himself in. He did just enough to exploit a vulnerability and show the door to voter fraud in Michigan to be wide open. By turning himself in, the story went out so wide that it showed the whole world they could do the same. And so the message of those stories was clear. If you can do the time, you can do the crime of voting illegally in Michigan. Nobody will stop you. And unless you report yourself, nobody will catch you. Both the Detroit News and the Free Press ran fake-ass polls during the election, showing a Kamala Harris victory. Then, after the election, the Harris camp admitted that internal polling never showed Harris ahead. Yet somehow newspaper polls that were less detailed did show Harris winning. Neither paper has had the intellectual honesty to talk about what happened and how they got it so wrong. As a result, the Detroit News and Free Press are not where the people of Michigan go anymore for true and timely stories. In 2025 in Michigan, truth is a blue lake. The mainstream papers have all but abandoned it. The Enjoyer Project was created to capitalize on exactly this dynamic, to sail in the blue lake of truth. Fortunately, though, for the 10 million people of Michigan, we're not alone. My guest today is a young reporter I'm excited to talk to and have been excited to watch grow. Kayleigh Lickliter is cutting her teeth at Detroit Documenters. Detroit Documenters is building a pipeline of reporters, young in their careers, who are getting their chops the right way. They do the old school work of journalism. They go to meetings, they write down what happened, then they ask questions about what they've learned. It's what journalism used to be before every reporter viewed themselves as a columnist. Kayleigh, I want to thank you so much. Welcome to the Enjoyer Podcast, and thank you for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
Kayleigh, we'll start you with our standard first question. What do you enjoy about Michigan?
Ooh. I enjoy being outside, enjoying the great outdoors. I love Higgins Lake. We spend a lot of time there in the summer, being on the boat, and the people. The people make Michigan beautiful. Great.
Absolutely. Kayleigh, you've talked about how you had a non-traditional path to journalism.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about that.
So I got into journalism in 2021, 2022, I would say technically. Shortly after the 2020 election, I became curious about local government. I saw something on Facebook about this event in Detroit with Detroit Documenters. It was just an information session to learn about your local government. I said, why not? So I went to it, showed up, learned a lot. And then I started documenting public meetings for Documenters. And so just background on what they do is they pay Detroiters to attend public meetings and to keep notes and to live tweet everything that happens during those meetings. So every decision there's a public record for. And all of the information that we gather from these meetings is publicly available. You can use it according to Documenters guidelines. I'm not sure what they are,
right?
But to inform your work. And so I started doing that in February 2021. And I took that back to where I live in the suburbs and started attending public meetings in the suburbs where I heard other things going on.
Yeah.
And so I actually published my first story I ever wrote was July of 2022. And that was based on the work I was doing from documentaries and everything that I learned there, but also stuff that I heard in a Livonia Planning Commission meeting about Detroit's demolition program. And so being able
Mm.
to put those two different pieces together
Yes.
just by attending public meetings
Not connecting.
was
That
kind
isn't
of
that has
the
become a lost art of journalism. So, Kayleigh, tell me about who you were going into that first meeting. I think about when I was a college freshman, and I was at Michigan. It was a rainy day, I remember, and the Michigan Review was having their first meeting. I didn't feel like going. I'm a homebody, and my friend just dragged me there. Was like, let's just go check it out, right? Ended up staying 4 years, becoming editor in chief. Loved it. It's why I'm a journalist today. Um, but there was some craving obviously within me to do this, even if I didn't want to go to the meeting that day. There was a reason I was talking about it and knew when the meeting was. What was it about you going into that first meeting that said, I might want to try this?
I think it was how much I learned during that first meeting.
Yeah.
There's Robert's Rules of Order and just the formality of it, and so I
Yeah.
really enjoyed being able to translate that on a to a public audience. And so most of what I've done is live tweeting, and so taking that information and kind of translating it essentially from bureaucratic language to the people's
Yes.
language so that
Yes.
they can understand what's going on is really what I enjoyed the most initially.
Absolutely. Kayleigh, why be a journalist at all? Sometimes, we talk about, maybe people in politics who make a weird decision or people in government. Dan Campbell shouldn't have gone for it on fourth down. And I'm saying all this stuff while I'm the guy who was working at a newspaper well into the 21st century. So it shows how smart I am. Why do this at all?
I mean, speaking for me personally, I enjoy truth seeking. I love um, putting the pieces together of a story. I love giving the public something that they can do something with. Um, Seeking justice for wrongdoing.
Hmm.
Those are the kind of things that really attract me to the profession. I can't speak for everybody because I didn't come in from a traditional path. I didn't start this wanting to be a journalist. I was just curious. I wanted to know
Yes.
about local government. I wanted the answers. And I think a lot of people want the same thing. They just don't know what to do. They
And
don't
it's
know how to
so
go about it.
funny that in this, in the 2020s, the answer is not go to this news outlet. Look at this reporter. It's like Elon Musk said, we are the media. You have to become the reporter damn near if you want to get the type of true and timely stories that you want to read. I had to do this podcast to have the podcast I wanted to listen to. Like it is, yeah. So, uh, who were you before you were a journalist?
I was a stay-at-home mom for a little while there. I had my son in 2017.
Beautiful.
Before that, I was in the private investigative field, so I was
Really?
I was a surveillance operative for a little while. So I did a
No
lot of
way.
I did insurance investigations. I did
You
retail
should talk to
fraud.
our boy Jay Z DeLorean. We have a private investigator who writes
Oh,
about
really?
stuff here. Yes, that
Absolutely.
is
I love
fascinating.
investigating. That's kind of my specialty. So anytime I'm in a
Yeah.
position where I can investigate something, that's where I thrive. So I um I did retail fraud for major corporation, and then so I was an investigator. I was a stay-at-home mom for a while, and then I was just a curious person sitting on my couch wanting to know about local government. So
So you have a long history of being up in people's business.
yeah, I guess you could say that.
Yeah. One of my favorites to ask people because you chose this. A lot of people, it almost feels like it was almost chosen for you. Like, there's people 16, 17 knew they wanted to do this stuff. That's crazy to me. I get more embracing it as an adult because that's what I did. So you've had some time to think about this one. What would you be if you were not a journalist?
To be honest with you, I couldn't tell you. I can't. I can't imagine
And
doing
that's why you're a
anything else.
journalist right there. That's why you're a journalist. Why can't you imagine doing anything else?
Everything just makes sense. Everything up until this moment. I mean, the investigative work that I did, being a mom, being
Yeah.
like the curious reporter, I always try to take myself back to where I started, and remembering the person, like you said, that I was in that first meeting. Um, and I can't unsee the experience that I've had. So I love the freedom. I love the work that I do.
Absolutely. Kayleigh, tell us about some of the stories that you've done that may have not been told otherwise. This Livonia, Detroit towing thing, that sounds like that could be one. But you guys are in that blue lake of truth where I'm sure a lot of these meetings you go to, it's not like there's media row. Your media row, I'm sure. So tell us about some stuff that you've done that would not have been done otherwise in Michigan.
Whew. So I try to stick to original reporting. There's one thing about me is that I do not like telling the story the same way, looking at the same details, repeating the facts and the circumstances over and over again. So I'm always
Mm,
looking for that kind of edge, that the competitive edge, really. I mean, I'm a competitive person. So
right.
um, always think outside the box, but also uh, approaching stories from the perspective of I've been sitting in these meetings, right? Like I've heard the building blocks of what led up to these stories, and so um, just for an example, one of the first big investigative stories that I ever wrote was about Kwame Kilpatrick's close friend, Bobby
Mm-hmm.
Ferguson, and that story was really born out of, again, my curiosity. I just wanted to know the circumstances of the Kwame Kilpatrick trial, but I didn't want the media's perspective. I just wanted to hear it, like
Mm.
exactly what happened.
Fresh.
Um, I wanted all the details.
Right.
I didn't want the click notes, and so I went and I got the transcripts from the trial, started reading them, um, and then one day I'm just sitting in a public meeting, and I see an address for a new contractor, and it just seemed familiar to me. I can't really. So I googled it, and I'm like, I wonder if that's the same address I saw on the transcripts, put two and two together, and
You
then
saw it from the transcripts and remembered it?
for whatever reason, I mean, the address is it kind of flows off your tongue, so it's kind of easy to remember, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and then there's the street name specifically. And so once I put two and two together, I started digging into public records. I mean, stuff that's readily available anytime.
Right.
I was searching on Lara, um, searching, yeah, public meeting minutes, documenters notes to try and put all the pieces together to see, is this really who I think it is?
Right.
Um, and so at the end of the day, the story landed on the front page of the newspaper on a Saturday above the fold, which I had no idea was a thing.
Yes. Oh, it's a thing.
And so it's kind of that reporting. I don't think anybody else. Uh, it was the kind of story that can't be recreated, because it came with so much information that you really had to pay attention to details,
What was the upshot of it?
like the 411 on what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. So essentially, Bobby Ferguson's daughter, Bobby Ferguson was convicted alongside of Kwame Kilpatrick, um, for bribery, racketeering, and corruption related charges. And his daughter, he had gotten out of prison early. Uh, 5 weeks later, he formed an LLC on the same day as his daughter. Um, and a year later, they were getting city contracts. Well, not they, I can't say they. She was getting city contracts. And so through a series of documents, I was able to confirm that they were operating on the same location based on the addresses that they were providing in public records.
Right.
And so I had approached the city and asked if he was able, because he still owed a couple $1 million in restitution, if he was able to contract with the city owing that much money to the city. And so that's when I was informed that they canceled $1 million in her contracts. And now I don't know what came first, the chicken or the egg. So I don't know if it was what I was investigating that prompted that, or if it was somebody else noticed. But at the end of the day, they canceled $1 million in contracts. Bobby Ferguson was debarred. And here we are today.
That's incredible. Kayleigh, I'm not sure if anyone, probably not in that newsroom throws around the word, but that's what we call a scalp. That's a scalp. Like, that is a resume line. Like, when you, and the information you unearth gets in the path of $1 million public contract, that's gigantic.
Born out of curiosity. I'm telling
Holy
you.
cow. I mean, that is incredible. And that is exactly what I'm talking about. That's the blue lake of truth right there, where it's wide open. And when you get out there, there's no one there. There's no other boats on the water. It was just you.
Yeah.
And the scary thing is,
it happens a lot.
But for you, there wouldn't have been anybody.
No.
So do not feel the need to disclaim credit for that, or maybe they figured it out on their own. It's clear that the but for in this situation is your reporting, right?
Absolutely. There is some situations where I'm surprised it doesn't get reported faster than it does. Kwame Kilpatrick, I was under the impression that everything to do with Kwame Kilpatrick was always going to be reported on fairly quickly. I've seen it. And so It was like one of those situations where I was like, where is anybody else in the same room as me? Like, nobody else remembers this. But that's also because a lot of the legacy, news people had left the industry or are off doing something else. And so you have young reporters who don't have that background knowledge. And so I feel like that is really what really helped make that story possible.
Another factor I would attribute to you having it alone is it feels like the Michigan media market has gotten very Lansing centric. And I don't know that stories like that are viewed to rate. And so when you get out there and you have this amazing material, there's no one fighting for it because everyone's trying to, get the next interview with the governor or see what's going on up there. I mean, that is an affirmation of make news local again, right there. The story you just told. Tell me about your workload and your workflow. Like, how many is everything still based on meetings at this point? Are you doing kind of investigative offshoots of what comes out of the meetings? Like, what's going on from day to day?
Yeah, I mean, I try and have an ear in every room that I possibly can. So there are some days where I'm not in meetings and I'm listening to the police scanner. I'm in arraignment hearings, just casually popping in. I like to spend a lot of time in other city, like outside of Detroit, listening to kind of the way that they're making decisions outside of Detroit. Because at the end of the day, it all eventually comes together.
Yes.
We can learn from each other. And so these days I've been spending a little bit of time in the suburbs, cities like Dearborn Heights, which has a very eventful city council. They've had a lot of issues in Dearborn Heights at their city council meetings. I spent a lot of time in Inkster, Ecorse, Livonia, you name
my
it.
Hometown, yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've really gotten to know Inkster very well. And there are some people there that are special people.
Yes. And they need better and deserve better than what they're getting.
Absolutely. And you realize there are some cities who can't get along, and there are some cities who have excellent civic infrastructure. They have a civic muscle. And that's what I would say about Inkster. People are very engaged. with their government. They show up to the council meetings, they ask for what they want. And you don't see that in a lot of other communities. And so I love being able to compare and contrast and stuff like that. But for the most part, I kind of just go wherever my gut tells me to go. If there's something going on that, I think the police scanner is going to be more relevant, then I'll do that. But other than that, I try not to hold myself to uh, a schedule or a specific workflow because everything's always changing all of the time.
Absolutely. The political science is always changing.
Yeah.
Talk about Detroit documenters. I mean, that it sounds like they're kind of the ideal landing spot. It's this weird thing I noticed in life where a high school teacher will take you under their wing. They don't get paid any more to do that, but they do it. And then you get to jobs that pay you and they don't mentor you. And because you go to a place like Detroit News, there is a not even an assumption, it's damn near a stated belief that you don't need much training anymore, and so there's no ground floor opportunities. I mean, if you snag an internship or something, it sounds like Detroit Documenters is a great inroads for someone who's young in their career. Could you please talk about it in that light?
It is. So the one thing that I absolutely admire about documenters is that it allows you to be the human. It's like it's a human experience essentially. So you go into the
Yes.
meeting, you have very little knowledge for the most part about how these things work, and you get to learn and you get to grow with the public. And so it's like these people, you show up to these meetings, you're documenting this. You don't realize at the time, and I sure didn't, how important that work could become or how useful that information could become at the end of the day. And
Yes.
so for me, I would love to see more people coming out of documenters with the same experience. I've been told that my experience is unique. Um,
How so?
I've documented or I've live tweeted over 120 meetings. And so for a lot of
Holy
people, they
cow.
come in and then they'll decide, they'll sit in these meetings and they'll decide, either they don't, it's too complicated. They don't want to take the time to understand. They don't have the time or the resources to.
It's not for them.
Yeah. Or they'll go on to do something political or policy related, or, they'll take it into their community. Cause you learn how to be a community advocate in those situations because you see what works.
Right.
And so for me, stepping into journalism, I really clung to the news side of it, and how the information that I was live tweeting was being used in the news. And so being able to kind of see that middle process all the way through, I think, was extremely helpful.
So you basically, what made it unique is that you stuck it out.
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
You
Stuck it
talked
out
about,
and always learned. I was always willing to learn and be a student.
yes. So, I'm sure there's some college kids who are going to see this, journalism school students, young reporters in their career. How do you go about studying the field as you're practicing in it?
Don't think about studying and practicing the field. You're learning, right? You have to let your own curiosity guide your questions, because if you're not interested
Oof.
in where you're going next, you're never going to stay there. Um, it is a very natural process. As long as you have humility, I think, as long as you're willing to go through it and to learn and to be honest about what you do and you don't know, I think there's really nothing that can stop you. And so, yeah, I don't know if I answered the question right.
Good enough. You mentioned that you're a competitor, and that is one of the key traits in journalism. And it's one of the things that kind of annoys me is I see a lot of people get beat on their beat and they don't do the follow up. You have to do the day too. And there's so many times when my day sucked because Freep, or not so much Freep, but Click on Detroit maybe would have a crime story or something that I don't have. And so you have to get caught up. You can't just elect to ignore it. But I see so much of that going on. Where did that competitor come from?
It's kind of natural, but I would say the same thing. I mean, the crime news stories, I'm glad that you said that because that is one of my biggest pet peeves is like you hear the crime in the story, but you never hear the outcome. And so for
Yeah.
me, it was always, I know what they're going to report because I've seen it my entire life. And if we're going to talk, the more I learned about like the competitive news, landscape and a lot of the problems that the news industry has just competition wise. You have
Mm-hmm.
three major broadcast news agencies in the city of Detroit, two major newspapers. And it was like, I didn't understand, the competitiveness between those two, the first to report.
Oh
I didn't want to
yeah.
be, it's not always about being the first to report. Sometimes it's doing it the best. And so I always wanted
Yes.
to do it the best. And very early on, the first story I ever wrote was about, demolition cemetery dirt being used in Detroit's demolition program.
Yeah.
And that story ended up I don't want to say who. A broadcast news agency in Detroit picked up that story and basically rewrote it in broadcast news style. And so for me, I was like,
They ripped and ran it.
I was offended.
Oh, you were shocked,
Yeah.
my friend. Oh, you sweet summer child. That is, there wouldn't be radio and TV news without print news.
And so, right. And so that's when I went, oh no, I'm going to write stories that nobody can recreate. And lo and behold, I write a story about Kwame Kilpatrick and it doesn't end up on broadcast news because it couldn't be recreated. So it was like, I,
That's the tough thing, isn't it?
yeah.
Is sometimes you have so much of a scoop
Oh yeah.
that it's not easily replicated. And so so there's two factors that go into, do I report on a story where I've been beat?
Yeah.
A, how badly beat am I? Like, is there a day two angle? Is there something I can do that's different than what's been done and not just a straight copy job? And B, do I have access to the information?
Mhm.
And in this case, C, with the kind of laziness of the 2020s, do I have ready access to the information?
Mhm.
They could have put together the dots. They could have done what you did,
Yeah, I
but they
did.
didn't. What did you think about that? You had a story and they just rip and run it. Then you have kind of just this delicious scoop of Kwame Kilpatrick related, city of Detroit, uh, good government, muckraking, all those things, and they don't touch it. What do you make of those respective choices?
For me, I always I at one point remember being at an editorial meeting and I was like, I blatantly asked broadcast news why they didn't do it because I was like, no, no,
Right.
you could have brought me on. If you asked, I would have come on and
Right.
talked about
Have
it.
me on and I'll talk about it.
And so it was one of those things where, all right, well, I did what I said I was going to do. That's the outcome. I'm fine with it because at the end of the day, you're only going to go to the same place to get the same story. It was printed in the newspaper. I have a copy. It's never going anywhere. And so it was one of those, all right, thank you for not doing that. But I also had somebody and a competitive, you know, the competitor for Detroit Free Press protect my byline on when they published the story. And
Brilliant.
so, yeah, and so I saw the best, I think, of reporters in that situation. And that's the person that I want to be, right? I want to be the person who's like, I don't really care about the competition. This is a great story and honoring it. And saying, either, the story was published for Bridge Detroit. So to have two newspapers now crediting Bridge Detroit for that original reporting, for me, I think was the
Absolutely.
win. It didn't
Absolutely.
matter if broadcast news did it. That was a win, I think, for local news in Detroit.
And you see how differently the two operate.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I've never seen a correction on TV or radio. They just trust that everything's ephemeral and the river of news is always moving. Print relies so heavily on credibility, It's like being a guy at LA Fitness. If you don't call fouls on yourself, you're not going to be allowed in the pickup game.
Hmm. True fact. True. True.
What was your read on my read on the Michigan media market? I hope you're not as far down this path, because this is heartbreak. This is hurt talking. Hurt people hurt people. Okay, it breaks my heart that a place I worked at for 10 years does work I can barely read. I've almost pivoted away from media criticism because the work I would be critiquing is so little believable and so little read. Why even bother?
Mhm.
What's your read on my read on the Michigan media market?
Um, there is this, I don't know why it happens this way, but it does. The inability to report on it from the lens of the average person, I think, is
Mm,
what holds a lot of this information back. And
yes.
the way that we follow through on it is like, we don't take the public's questions and apply it to the next story. We just,
Mm-hmm.
we hear there's the announcement and then the project, is built and we covered the groundbreaking. But then all the questions in between often get missed. And I think
Mm,
that if we spent more time listening to what the public is asking and how the public is talking about it, I think to better inform the next story and the follow up,
mm-hmm.
I think it would wrap it up together like much smoother. We would have people who are genuinely interested in the stories that we do write, instead of just letting the government tell you what they want you to know and letting them decide what's going to be out in the public. There's nobody really pushing back on those narratives and saying this is what the people want to know. Can you just answer it simply? It's like a yes or no question, and you have 5 paragraphs worth of a press release to figure out that it's not the answer that you were. It doesn't answer the question. So,
And that's what we have to get back to is people centered news. Like if I would do, if I'm explaining something, when I had a young stepkid, a young teenager, my rule would be if I could explain it to them and they understand it, then I've conveyed it. And if I can't, then I don't understand it well enough.
mhm.
And I that's what I see missing, especially when I look at the work of Lansing. It seems that it's written to please sources or to placate a politician you might like, but none of it at any point thinks about what do the 10 million people need from us.
Mhm.
And I see that as a big opening. It looks like you're walking in it.
Yeah, I mean, there you have traditional beat reporting, but you don't really have place-based reporting either. And
Mm,
so for like Detroit documentaries, for example, they're only covering Detroit, occasionally Wayne
right.
County and some more regional authorities, but it's for the place-based. And so when you approach reporting from a place, you come with the history of that community, right? Like people come with all their baggage,
Absolutely.
and a lot of times there's shared baggage in a community. And so they're coming to the story with their own perspective. And stories essentially start in the community. And so if you're only going to look at the overall process and the way that it's supposed to work, and you're not looking at the experience on the ground, you're going to miss the whole story. I mean, what is the point of even reading it at that point? So I think, yeah, I honestly think that place-based reporting, I would almost rather do that than I would beat reporting.
Yes.
Mhm.
I talk about make news local again. And to me, that means two things. First, the supremacy of locally reported stories over AP copy from a world away. Um, in the radio realm, 9, 10 a.m., they just decide it's too expensive to pay Justin Barclay, a Michigan based radio host. We'll just use basically the radio equivalent of AP
Mm.
and, and, and run a tape from a service. Well, who's going to listen to that? And two, it'd be like if the Detroit News fired Charlie LaDuff and said we're going to run more AP stories. Everybody would understand that to be a disinvestment. It's the same thing in radio. And two, the other part is to me, We are all capital reporters because since 2020, Lansing's become so invasive that even as we cover local communities, you have to cover how Lansing's actions affect those local communities.
Mhm.
What do you think about that thesis? How can a local reporter incorporate Lansing without becoming a capital reporter and spending their time there?
Um, that is a great question. I would say have the Lansing reporter and have the local reporter, but make sure they work well together. Because
Mm,
as long as you can understand the difference between, this person's experience and what's coming out of Lansing, and you can put those two together. Um, I think I would work, but I don't know that those people are in the same room in local newsrooms today. Um, they're
different
just
rooms, different sensibilities.
the priorities even. And
Yeah,
so having, i i I don't know that there's even an easy answer because at the same time, you really have to understand the bottom before you get to the top. You can also float back down, come back down to the local level. And so without being able to have those open conversations and the dialogue between what's happening in Lansing and what's happening in the community, um, there's really no connection at all. But
I think
also
some of the
more
best. Oh,
local
no, go on.
newsrooms, more local newsrooms would be great.
More newsrooms, more heads, more opportunities. There have to be more physical people hired to do the work because the work is so important and everyone's trying to get something for nothing.
Ugh,
And I'm sure even some people might look at the documenters and say, "Oh, I can get their cheaper work, or I can get their stories and kind of carry it from there." And I'm like, man, stop trying to get something for nothing. Invest in what you want to see grow.
absolutely. Absolutely. I wish I could have documenters everywhere.
Yeah,
Every city, informing whether it's government decisions or it's local reporting or just the community in general. There's enough information to go around. Like there is, the way I see it, when I look at an agenda, every line item on an agenda is a story. If
yeah,
you're creative enough,
right.
and if you have enough people and the talent to do it, so why not do it?
And that to me makes the tragedy of the press scrum even more tragic. That you'll have a half circle of reporters gathered around a single Lansing lawmaker while Kayleigh is here by her lonesome looking through transcripts and putting together dots. But
I'm busy in the
also,
back room.
news doesn't result from that scrum.
No.
News comes from that independent person searching for truth. Charlie LaDuffy's been one of my earliest mentors. He described himself as a wolf. He
Mhm.
doesn't get fed steaks that are nice and seasoned for him and cooked up. He has to go kill what he eats.
Yeah.
I'm hearing the wolf in you, Kayleigh.
Yeah, I don't rely on story tips. Actually, most of the stories that I've written have been built up here. They didn't come from a story tip. They came from me showing up at, an impound yard and talking to people there about what was going on. Why is this line so long? And then getting a remarkable, yeah, amount of information just from that alone. And so, yeah, no, I also had the experience of being in the press scrum and asking questions and then being like, whoa, we weren't prepared for those questions because they're not
Mm-hmm.
used to it. They're not used to somebody, you know, coming equipped with the information and the background and the information
Right,
and asking the
right.
follow-up questions the first time. So
Mm,
thank you for the press conference, but no, I'm ready for the next step already. And so are they. They just don't want to say it.
yeah.
And so
Kayleigh, we'll get you out of here on this one. I know you've got a busy day, but and thank you so much for taking this time. This is fascinating. I told you privately, I want to tell everyone else that people like Kayleigh, and some other young journalists I talk to are what keep me from going totally cynical. Because when I talk to someone like Kayleigh or when I look at her work, um, or Sam Robinson, of Detroit 1 Million, I see a purity in their search for truth. I see an interest in news that is not yet and hopefully will never be corrupted by narratives. I see people doing the toughest thing to do in news, which is to start from a blank page. Not some, oh, here's a budget line this long about a story that's going to be this long. And it's just not easy to do. So I look up to you in a sense because I see that I see a real non-cynical approach to journalism and a real belief that good can result from the truth being out there. So 2025 is young. You are young. As you look ahead, what's got your eye this year?
Whew. A lot of things had my eye this year. What has my eye this year? I want to keep doing the work that I have been doing. I want to build off everything that I've done so far. There's a, a lot of stories, a lot of follow-up stories on stories that I've written, and I want to continue being in the outskirts, making regional connections, and
Mm.
telling the stories that don't get reported on. So that to continue being me
Expand on the outskirts, please.
on the outskirts, expanding just beyond Detroit. You know, everything that I've done so far has been in the city of Detroit. Um, I want to kind of reverse that and see what's possible there. I mean, I'm making these connections in the city of Detroit, answering questions in the Detroit, sitting in the suburbs. So how can I make that something special? So I
Absolutely.
want to continue this in the suburbs. I want to continue doing this work, so that, 10 years from now, we're not going to look back on today and say, "Oh, well, Bob forgot." I want it.
Yes.
I want to be on the
Yes.
front end
I want to catch the next one before it happens or while it's happening
as
and
soon as it
prevent it from
happens.
happening. Yes.
Yes.
Not write history.
Oh yeah.
Actually, I'll get you out of here on this one. If you could give advice to your, say, look at yourself 10 years ago, before you were even in this field, what would you tell that person, that young truth seeker?
Curiosity killed the cat, but it's not going to kill the dog.
Do you have that on a shirt?
No.
Do you have that trademarked?
No.
Do something with that. Do so. I want a shirt that says that.
You got it.
Kayleigh, deliver shirts that say that. I will line up to buy them. Kayleigh, you are an absolute breath of fresh air. Where can people find you online? Where can people learn more about you and your work?
I'm in Detroit Documenters. You can follow me on Twitter, X. Sorry, forgot.
Yeah, you
But
kind of dead named it. I mean, it's. But
I gotta
yeah,
come up with a
Kayleigh,
better name.
you are gifted and you are motivated and you're an inspiration. So please
Thank you so
keep doing
much.
what you're doing.
Thank you so much. Thank you.